Sustainability, and I quote, is an admirable goal, but our policies need to be sustainable themselves. And therefore we need policies that are compatible with human nature. Now, nobody would really disagree with that, but what I'm going to show you is that interventions that have been done to get people to change their behavior are often not based on a sound understanding of human nature. If there's one thing that I want you to get from my talk, is that there should be more interactions between environmental scientists and behavioral scientists to actually address some of these problems and get people to change their behaviors. But in the 70s, of course, a different environmental psychology emerged, which looks at key questions about not how physical environment impacted us, but how humans impacted the environment. Talking about issues like climate change, biodiversity loss, etc. And that branch of environmental psychology has obviously grown over the past 30 years as the problems that I outlined before became more poignant. For that, I want to sort of coin a new field that we can be working on. It's called evolutionary environmental psychology. Well, here are some of the assumptions of that new field. First, there is a human nature. There is a set of traits that are more or less uniquely human that define us as humans. Our brains and behaviors are ultimately the product of evolution through natural selection. Cultural, obviously, is also important. The way we socialize our children, the way we educate people is also very important. But the biological side is also important here. Now, an assumption is that our mind contains many evolved psychological mechanisms which are useful in producing the kind of behaviors that further our reproductive success. So these if-then decision rules, they're activated in particular situations to solve particular kinds of problems. But, and that's a big but, and that's what this book is about, these are decision rules that worked well in a particular environment, and that's the environment in which humans have probably lived for 99% of their time on Earth. And so the choices that we make may not always be adaptive from an evolutionary point anymore, and that's what is called mismatch. One big myth I want to dispel straight away, and that is the myth of the ecological noble savage. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, French-Swiss philosopher, claimed that humans in nature were living harmoniously with nature and that they were corrupted by society, by modern society, if you like. I think that's not true, or at least it's not completely true. It's not even half true. Humans have a long history of causing ecological destruction, and there are many indications of that. And there is also no relationship, as many anthropologist studies have found, between the sacredness of nature, as these traditional societies claim, and the kind of practices that they encounter. So how sustainable their practices are ultimately is determined by technology. The more sophisticated their technology, for example, for catching fish, fishing nets, the less sustainable they are. This quote comes from two evolutionary psychologists who were among the first to take this field more seriously, Wilson and Daly. The suggestion that our evolved human nature is a source of environmental exploitation and degradation is not a claim that nothing can be done, but a warning that effective conservation and remediation strategies will have to incorporate an understanding of relevant, evolved psychological processes in order to modify human action. Now, what are some of these strategies or these solutions? Well, one sort of field of solutions is what is now known as the name of nudging. So these are low-cost, non-invasive behavior change strategies, and they're ultimately, as I claim, meant to overcome mismatch problems. So what nudges do is that they make deliberate decisions that are not part of our evolutionary history. They try to make them more automatic. There are obviously ethics involved, which we can talk about that as well. To what extent can you nudge people in all kinds of ways, and wouldn't it be desirable sometimes to get structural solutions to problems? I'm now presenting my research program looking at 5 psychological biases that mitigate against sustainable practices, that really undermine it, and then I'm trying to find solutions to that based on kind of strategies that might work, that don't necessarily take away people's freedoms. This is a classic paper by Fair and Gachte, maybe familiar, where they had people play these kind of prisoner's dilemmas or public good games, either in a situation where people couldn't be punished if they were defecting, if they were not restraining, or they could be punished. And what you see very clearly, this is the cooperation levels within the group. And what you see is that with punishment, people were behaving in a pro-social cooperative way. But as soon as you take away the punishment, cooperation drops. And it drops particularly when people know that the game is going to end. They take what they got. And so this clearly shows to me that people, all else being equal, prioritize self-interest over a sort of global collective interest. And so environmental policies fail if they try to persuade people to value societal interest above their own interests. But evolutionary theory also suggests some solutions to that problem. You can actually harness people's genetic self-interest because people care not just about themselves but also about their family. There have been some attempts, for example, in campaigns to use kin labels like Mother Nature. This is what you do for Mother Nature, and that actually helps people in some way to appreciate the collectivity better through fictional family ties. Or you can activate kinship cues to foster trust. If you activate kinship cues, for example, it can be physical cues, it doesn't have to be, it could also be linguistic cues, people are more likely to cooperate. Another mechanism we know from research on the commons dilemma, the social dilemma, is reciprocity. We're doing our part for the environment. Can we count on you? We're doing stuff. Can we count on you to repay that? Indirect reciprocity is you do something for your community and you get it back by the community, not a specific other. My claim is that human mind evolved to prioritize immediate interests because discounting the future had enormous benefits in the past. And then the question is, well, environmental policies, they can fail if they try to persuade people to value future rewards more than immediate rewards. But then the question is, how can you shift people's preferences? And that's something that we've been doing as part of the fertility project in Singapore. We know, for example, from the literature on life history theory that people in a stable and safe environment, they make delayed decisions about their parenthood when they want to get children. Why? Because the environment doesn't change. They can wait 10, 15 years and they'll still be in the same situation. But if you're in an uncertain environment, an unpredictable environment, maybe even a hostile environment, you should reproduce more quickly. You do not know if you'll be around in 10, 15 years. There are sex differences in discount rates. For example, men discount the future more, particularly when they're in the presence of an attractive woman. They're more likely to conspicuously consume and show off and invest resources quickly rather than wait. So sex ratios implicitly change our strategies, and particularly for men. Third motivation. Are we interested in our absolute status or our relative status? Now, what world would you rather live in? You earn 100K and your colleagues earn 120K per year. Or would you rather live in a world where you earn 80K, $80,000, and your colleagues earn $60,000? Now, if you were to go for your absolute income or your absolute status, you would obviously go for scenario, just paying an A. But that's not what most people do most of the time. They'll choose scenario B. Why? Because absolute income says really nothing. What matters is how well you do compared to your neighbors, your community, your family, your colleagues, your friends. So environmental policies fail if they try to persuade people to be content with their current status and behave in ways that lower their status. People don't generally like to do that. But what you can do then is try to improve the status of the desired behavior, in this case the more sustainable behavior. Could these kind of behaviors serve as peacock's tails? Can you make green choices desirable or status enhancing? And again, the answer is yes, you can. You can get people to engage in sustainable behaviors, make sustainable decisions, if you prime them with particular kinds of status cues. And we call that competitive environmentalism or conspicuous conservation. In the third scenario, that's the conspicuous conservation scenario. It's a hybrid car. In the scenario where they were looking, who would you like to have your kids with and have a long and healthy relationship with, they were actually preferring the Joshua as the conspicuous conservation, the one who bought the hybrid car. Again, you can use status in order to leverage people to change more to more green behaviors. The human mind evolved to imitate, often mindlessly, what others are doing. But environmental policies can fail if you try to get people to behave in ways that they think is not what the majority around them do. So what can you do? And this is the other condition out of this this towel reuse experiment. Join our fellow guests in helping to save the environment. Most people are already doing it. I can't be left behind. Very effective, minimal kind of nudge, if you like. You can make your utility bill, you can add a social component to it. Not just how much you use, but how much do you use compared to other households. Finally, evolutionary mismatch. The human mind is adapted to ancestral environments and slow to respond to evolutionary novel threats. If you ask people what kind of environment do you prefer, there's many studies showing that they prefer an environment like the ones that humans evolved in, a kind of savanna kind of environment. Environmental policies can fail if people are not easily persuaded by environmental threats that they cannot feel, hear, smell, touch or see, that they don't have any sensory experience with directly. And that's a problem because climate change is something abstract. One of the things we've been doing is getting people to sensory experience environmental problems like meat consumption, for example. Given that we evolved in natural environments, savanna kind of environments with plenty of nature, plenty of greenery, can that be used as a leverage to get people to appreciate the environment in which we live more, and can we use that to leverage the sustainability decisions? So people were discounting the future less in the nature condition. And we presume that is because when you're in a lush environment with lots of green, you don't find as much competition for resources. So you're much less likely to be impulsive. Whereas in an urban environment where you see everyone engaging in conspicuous displays of wealth, competition, etc., it sort of makes you more impulsive in the kind of decisions you make. Humans evolved various psychological biases that may hinder the effectiveness of environmental interventions. And then the second take home is that if we try to understand these biases better and also where they come from, this discrepancy between our modern and our ancestral environment, maybe we can develop clever strategies that may be sometimes very low in cost and non-evasive, but we can just get people, nudge them in the desired direction to tackle some of these unsustainable practices that we face and the environmental problems that we face.